with your hosts, Jeffery Pritchett and Guy Weddle. Tonight's guest is Nick Redfern in a show entitled, My Name is Legion, for We Are Many. This is for all our Christian friends out there. First off, a few statements. I'm not going to say much about I don't know how many of you have heard, but, Mabus has always had a reporting center for UFOs and paranormal phenomenon. It's always been in the kind of shadows, and we didn't really bring it to the public light as much, but lately, basically, we all know about the MUFON corruption. I'm not going to get into it heavily here now, but to make a long story short, we brought Mabus Associated Bureau of Ufology Studies, more into the limelight a little bit, and basically we're taking memberships right now, and what we're doing is we're a very laid-back reporting center. We do investigation. I would like to get involved with some political activism, some kind of Fight Club mean kind of shit, not some laid-back Steve Bassett puss-tootin', but some kind of Fight Club in-your-face, up-your-ass, harassing political people about the subject of UFOs in a mean kind of way, because that's how I operate. But to make a long story short, Chase Koetsky resigned from MUFON and is now on my Mabus management team. She used to be the Star Team manager. She resigned, and now she's with Mabus. We're putting together the team. Like I said, we're going to have fun with it. We're not going to be a bunch of uptight, jerk-offs in suits. We're going to be like kind of the Police Academy of Ufology. Like the Ghostbusters, Bill Murraying it, baby. So we're putting everything in line right now, slow and steady. You can sign up. It's free membership. We're not going to charge you hundreds of dollars a year, like some of these other people that are just doing this for money, and then they sell their cases to Bigelow like sellouts. We're just going to do a laid-back thing. If you want to hear more about this, I'll be on TGAF, Point TV, Friday, this coming Friday. What's the date? I got it right here. March 11th from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. That's TGAPH.TV, The Great American Phenomenon Hunt, with Jeff Grunno, and I'll be talking about Mabus and the MUFON situation. So basically, I just want to talk about our guest for next week, and then we'll get into our guest because I just want to spend most of the show talking to him, quite honestly. Next Saturday, we're going to be doing a Philip K. Dick tribute with Tessa B. Dick. She's been on the show before. She's back. And with Anthony Peake. So basically, Saturday night is a big, giant Philip K. Dick tribute of just talking about Philip K. Dick hardcore with people that actually knew him and are familiar with him. So we're going to have a good time with that. And then Sunday, we're doing a special show, which we kind of stopped doing Sunday shows, but I could only get this dude for one Sunday, so we're just going to do one Sunday show in March and not really do any more unless someone great comes up and we can't fit them in. But Sunday, we're going to interview Clifford Mahooty, Zuni shaman medicine man, about the snake people, about a sacred native dance that summons UFOs, and also the show's going to be entitled Shedding Skin. And I have a big boner for shamanism, so I'm really looking forward to that one. So let's get to tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Nick Redfern. The show is entitled My Name is Legion, for We Are Many. And he is the author of Final Events and the Secret Government Group on Demonic UFOs in the Afterlife. So let's welcome Nick Redfern. How you doing, Nick? Are you there?
Hey, guys. I'm doing good, thanks. How's it going?
Yeah, what's up?
Well, it's pretty peachy, man. We're hanging in there. But basically, Nick, I just wanted to get straight into the book, and I just wanted to ask you, how did you come across this story that pretty much inspired you to create the book? How did that begin, pretty much?
Well, basically what happened was that about 4 years ago, I spoke with a guy named Ray Boucher, And Ray's a former state director for MUFON. He was for the state of Nebraska. And back in the 1980s, he was doing a lot of research into government involvement in the UFO subject, particularly with respect to the whole Rendlesham Forest case in England. He's actually tried to lobby his senator to get files released, or to push for files to be released at least. And this sort of got my interest in the work he was doing at the time. And I actually wasn't looking into this story back then, but the more I dug into the work he was doing, I found that in 1991 he'd mentioned how he'd been approached by two physicists from the Department of Defense who were working on a classified UFO project, which they believed, or initially everybody on the project, it was supposedly designed to sort of contact the greys of ufology, you know, these sort of little short guys with the black eyes. And the story was, as the project went on, the guys in the project came to believe that what they were dealing with wasn't extraterrestrial, that it was sort of occult-based. And Ray, the reason they approached Ray was because, as well as being a MUFON state director, he was also an Anglican priest, and they wanted his opinions on, you know, what do you think about the idea that this phenomenon's occult-based or demonic? And Ray actually did have that belief system, so that's why they kind of met. And so this was the bare bones of the story. I'd read in a couple of books maybe 15 years ago, but nobody had ever sort of really interviewed him extensively, so that's what I did. I just picked the phone up one day or emailed him and said, hey, you know, interesting story. Can we take it further, you know, to see if I can find more people who are attached to this group and, you know, get your story out there, and perhaps it'll open further doors, that's sort of basically what kicked it all off.
All right, well, basically, in the Bible, you know, it speaks of dragons fallen from heaven, who are, you know, Satan's fallen angels, his army. And it makes sense that they would, you know, possibly, if this is a true story, and there's very similar stories in other cultures that align with this story. Like we talked to Rosemary Ellen Guiley, the Jinn story was kind of similar to the Lucifer story too on many levels. But the thing is, it seems like the book revolves around sort of like this story to where they fall, and I guess on some level they start to get technology like UFO technology, and then they start, like, you know, messing with mankind. Is that right? Yeah,
I mean, the important thing I need to stress is that, you know, I don't personally endorse this story at all. I mean, the story's true as it's told. What I don't endorse is the belief system of the group. I think it's way too simplistic because, you know, it's like there are countless religions around the world with different, wildly varying belief systems, yet they concluded the answer has to be in the Christian perspective. You know, they didn't look at it from the perspective that this is a phenomenon, or an occult-based phenomenon even, that could be an amalgamation of various belief systems or whatever. It was, no, this is just according to the Christian belief system, and any other theory, even an occult or supernatural theory for the phenomenon, is wrong unless it fits in with Christianity. Now, you know, my view is nobody knows, because we have wildly different belief systems in various religions, no one clearly can have the right answer unless it's just one. But then how do you prove which one's correct? You know, everybody says, no, my version's correct. That's why there's so much turmoil going on in the planet, because, you know, religion causes fights. So basically, you know, as I've stressed to people, I don't endorse the belief system of the group at all. I do endorse some of their ideas about the phenomenon being negative and not friendly, and that it may be a phenomenon that isn't actually extraterrestrial. It may be, you know, something stranger. But the idea to me that it's, you know, the final battle between heaven and hell, I think that says more about the group's personal belief systems than it does about actually having proof. You know, by their own admission, you know, their conclusions were based on, in some cases, the fact that their preconceived beliefs, because they were strong Christians, you know. So it's kind of like having a debunker coming in and debunking Roswell because he's a debunker, you know, his mind's made up. And I think that was something that's an important aspect of the story. You know, they weren't open-minded, unbiased people. A lot of them were extreme fundamentalist Christians who happened to be in the government and looked at the UFO phenomenon and, of course, you know, placed it into their own belief system.
So is it like a think tank, like a right-wing Christian group?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, what happened was that when I interviewed Ray Bochet for this meeting he had in 1991, basically the story was, as I said, he was approached by two guys in the Department of Defense, two physicists, and they outlined the whole thing to him, that they were trying to contact the Greys, supposedly. They had this crackpot idea that it was basically like a follow-on from the remote viewing programs in the 70s where, back then the CIA and the Army and everybody else was trying to determine if agents, if you like, could use their minds to spy on the enemy. Well, the idea was that if these stories about the Greys were true and abducting people and wiping their memories clean, clearly they possessed extraordinary mental powers. And so the idea was, can we understand the powers that the Greys have and then harness their mind powers as an even greater tool of psychic warfare, where they could even psychically assassinate people, cause heart attacks and strokes at a distance, that sort of thing. That's literally what they told Ray Bochet they were looking into. But he was told that the more the group got into it, what happened was it was like a dark cloud came over it and all sorts of things began to go wrong, bad luck, ill health, and the people in the group came to believe that they kind of opened a doorway not to extraterrestrials, but to some sort of dark, ancient, demonic phenomenon that was masquerading as extraterrestrial, to get its grips into the group, if you like, and the people involved. And so they wanted his opinion. Now, when Ray related this to me, he said, feel free to publish the story and research it and dig into it as much as you like. The only things he asked me not to publish were a couple of things that led me to various other people in the group, which were just things that, put me on their trail. And I agreed to that, providing he had no problem with me publishing whatever the other people told me. And so the more I dug into it, I kind of got a good picture of what it was. And to get back to your point, yes, it's like a think tank group that was tasked, actually a long time ago initially, in looking at the UFO phenomenon, but discarding the idea that it was all hoaxes or misidentification, but also discarding the extraterrestrial angle, and coming around initially, when they first kicked off, to the idea that it was occult-based, however you want to define the occult, or supernatural. But then in later years, when the earlier membership kind of died off or retired, and it became filled with more and more Christian people and fundamentalists, particularly during the Reagan era and the Bush era, but then it was sort of remodeled. The belief system became more along the lines of, this is a Christian battle between good and evil, and the original sort of just straightforward, less defined occult angle was sort of kicked to one side. But yeah, they're not like an agency, as far as I can tell, like the CIA, with a budget which you can find on the congressional listings and things like this, but they're more of like a think tank that possibly even gets like black budget funding, so, that doesn't necessarily officially exist, where the people in the group actually have other positions within the government and the military, but part of their work involves this think tank, but that may not be their main job, if you like. It's kind of like the whole Iran-Contra thing in the 80s. There was no official Iran-Contra group, but you had people in the government and the military and the intelligence community who banded together to, that became this sort of Iran-Contra-based body. So, in other words, I think it's something along those lines. It's difficult, I'll be the first to admit, when I've interviewed like 12 people from a group that are collectively over the decades it's been around, there may have been 200 or 300. It's kind of like trying to get a full picture of the CIA from interviewing maybe 10 or 12 retired CIA agents or whatever. So.
Right. My mom and dad are both, they're pretty strict Mormons. And my mom believes like I do. She's a liberal and everything like that. And my dad is just, he's nuts. And he told me, he's like, I believe that aliens are demonic because God made us in his image, and they don't look like us, so they must be evil. You know what I mean? I mean, that's like the rationale, and it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, my view is, I personally don't care what people believe, when it comes to religion. I'm not a particularly religious person. I've never been to a church other than to see people get married or buried, literally. I'm from England. England's not a particularly religious country. But I don't mind what people's belief systems are, and I wouldn't knock them because, nobody knows what the truth is. But one thing I do know for certain is that because there are so many religions, they can't all be right. Somebody has to be wrong. And if one religion is wrong and it has millions of followers, then that means millions of people are wrong as well. So I don't see how it's possible for this group, or in any group, to say definitively that their view is correct and everybody else's is wrong. Now, where I do agree with them, a long time ago, I kind of pretty much disregarded the whole extraterrestrial angle because I think it's just not weird enough to explain all the things that are going on. And I do think it's probably more along the lines of however we define the paranormal, something like that, or extra-dimensional, something like along those lines. And I think over the centuries, it's masqueraded as various different phenomena to suit and reflect the belief systems of the people of the time. Maybe in 2,000 years ago it appeared as jinns, and like Jacques Vallée said, in the 1500s it was fairies. 50 years ago it was long-haired space brothers. Today it's sort of cold, emotional, black-eyed greys. 50 years from now it might be something else. And so I do agree with them in that sense that the phenomenon's manipulative and not what it appears to be. But that's a long stretch from saying, we're literally talking about demons from hell that are coming to steal our souls and masquerading as aliens, in my view. But, I'm not one who rigidly, forces this theory down anybody's throat, because I'd be as bad as people who do that from the other angle and say, we're right, and if you don't believe us, you're going to burn in hell or whatever.
So they didn't go back any farther than, like when Christianity started, because they missed a lot.
Well, yes. Yeah, they did. They actually went to like a lot of very ancient Babylonian legends and things like that.
Oh, okay.
But what they concluded was that all the people who weren't Christian that had looked into it were correct in the sense that they were interpreting it as not extraterrestrial, but they were wrong in saying, they were entities, negative entities from this religion or that religion. They said, no, you got it wrong. They're all related to the Christian religion. But they didn't deny that, centuries ago and thousands of years ago that people had contact with these beings, but, they interpreted them in relation to their own religions. And this group, the Collins Elite, as it called itself, said that, basically concluded that, no, these people have got it wrong as to the origin. It's nothing to do with their religions because their religions are false. That was basically the approach to it.
Well, how much influence did this group have?
Well,
did they make policy or anything like that, or did they?
Well, when it comes to the amount of influence, it depends on the time frame. I'll explain what I mean by that. Certainly, as far as I can tell, they actually existed in some form, although a very, very sort of unofficial form to start with, and even along the lines of just meeting for drinks after work. We're talking literally late 40s and early 50s, where a lot of these guys would be working in D.C., in the same area, where you have a lot of the military and the intelligence agencies stationed, and they would meet and get together and discuss the phenomenon. And they looked at things like, for example, who was saying what to who in the UFO field at the time, and they found that many of the early players within the UFO field, and this is actually true, did have deep links to the occult, if you like. For example, George Adamski, the earliest, or one of the most famous, certainly, contactees, he's co-author on his first book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, Desmond Leslie. Well, Desmond Leslie's father was a deep follower of Aleister Crowley. Now, George Hunt Williamson, one of the other early contactees, he actually made his contacts, allegedly, with the long-haired space brothers via Ouija boards. And so they put strands together like that. And then they found that one of Aleister Crowley's most famous disciples was, of course, Jack Parsons, who was an occultist, but he was also a brilliant rocket scientist who actually, without Parsons, NASA certainly wouldn't exist in the form that it does today. And every Halloween, NASA actually celebrates Jack Parsons' life and works, where they bring out all these like mannequins and have like a little celebrating party to him. And what they found
that's kind of creepy.
But what they actually found was that Jack Parsons had actually met Kenneth Arnold, the man who, arguably ushered in the era of the flying saucer. And Parsons, 1 year before the whole flying saucer wave kicked off, this was in 46, he was engaged in this ritual called the Babylon Working, which was basically designed to conjure up like an elemental being and open doorways to some of the things that Crowley had done years before, such as manifesting this weird-looking creature known as Lamb. And if you look at the pictures of Lamb on the internet, it looks pretty much like a proto-grey. So in other words, they're putting strands together like this and thinking that, hang on, everybody's saying this is extraterrestrial. If that's the case, why are we seeing all these early key players in the subject, all having links to the occult, to Ouija boards, to Crowley, and even with Kenneth Arnold, to Jack Parsons, Crowley's number one disciple, if you like. And that, granted, they admitted that it was just strands, but their view was, well, we've got more evidence than the guys who are looking for from the UFO angle. We're actually seeing connections here, and that's what pushed them on. So, in other words, that didn't, although it was interesting to them, to go back to your point, that didn't sort of, I guess, influence people in governments at the time. It was really low key. And even in the 50s and 60s, I think, the best way I can describe it is I think they got money channeled through to them, and people in the knowing governments and the intelligence world who knew the group existed, it was like, oh yeah, that's that weird group who sort of sit in room 543 or whatever, and just UFOs, and we give them $50,000 a year or whatever. It literally was like that. It was very, very low key. It seems to be the case that from the mid-70s onwards, they started attracting more official interest in terms of getting more funding. And certainly in the 80s, with the Reagan administration, they really, things were really amped up for them then in terms of funding, work, and certainly through the Bush years as well. Now, of course, we know that Reagan, as well as having a deep interest in UFOs, his library, when he was in the White House, he had a number of books there which talked all about the apocalypse and war, prophecy-type books talking about war breaking out in the Middle East, like a Third World War. So, in other words, the group, I think, probably reflected the beliefs of people like Reagan and certain people in the Bush era. And so they gravitated towards the group and then said, hang on, they're doing interesting stuff. Let's fund them even more.
So the name of the group is Collins Elite, right?
Well, I mean, this is sort of a, no pun intended, a grey area, but that's the name that was given to me because that was a nickname they came up with in the early 50s. It's sort of an obscure story. They actually had a consultant from a town in New York called Collins, small town, which pretty much everybody in the town worked in the cheese industry. And this guy was a Quaker, and he actually, or was it a Mormon? One of the two, I forget now, I think he was a Quaker. And he was actually consulting with them because he was deeply interested in and was widely read on the subject of demonology. And they nicknamed him like the elite of Collins because everybody else worked in the cheese industry, and he was sort of, he was fascinated by demonology, and he had a contact or a friend or a family member who was actually linked with somebody in the group, and so they got him on board, and so they jokingly nicknamed him the elite of Collins, and then they took the name from there. But that was a nickname. Now, the nickname was the only thing that was ever used when I spoke with these people, but I freely admit the fact that there was a nickname doesn't mean there may be a more official name, which one of the problems is, if you file a Freedom of Information request for Collins Elite, you may not get anything because if it's a nickname, it's not going to reflect the real name. It's kind of like the CIA. The CIA's nickname is the company, but, there's no letterheaded paper that says the company, it says Central Intelligence Agency. So I think it is possible that although the Collins Elite nickname was used to me, I don't rule out at all the idea that it really was just that, a nickname, and that there was like an official title as well, possibly. And maybe that it was conveniently, I was given the nickname each occasion specifically so I wouldn't, uncover the real names. But that's speculation.
Did you get any resistance or anything after doing this book? Hendrik Holt, a guy off Facebook, that's his nickname, but he asked me to ask you that. Did you get any resistance possibly from anyone? Not
resistance. I mean, there were people who were willing to talk, and there were people who told me outright, well, I know what you're talking about, and yeah, I was with the group 30 years ago or whatever, but no, I'd rather not say anything. But there was nothing like, sinister warnings or anything like, no Men in Black type stuff or nothing like that. It was just a case of some of the people, I think, actually wanted the story out to sort of test the waters to see what people thought about it. And others just did not want to comment. But the ones who did comment, they offered some intriguing and interesting information. But again, the problem is when you're dealing with sort of whistleblower type people and old timers, then even I admit, people say, well, how do you know you weren't deceived to hide the fact that aliens really exist? And, this religious angle is just a charade. I truthfully cannot say that. I truthfully cannot say that this wasn't some sort of plan to sort of have me running around chasing a bogus story for 3 years when I could be doing something else. But what I would say, the reason I don't think that's the case is because I think disinformation operations usually work because somebody is targeted. But I wasn't looking for this story. I just happened to chance upon it in a book where I read a little bit about Ray Boucher's experience. And then I approached him. I would have been more suspicious if the group had approached me and said, hey, we need this story getting out and this is what it is. Then my view would be, or the questions would be, well, why do you want this story out? What's your motivation? But in this case, it was the other way around. I went knocking on the door looking for them. So that's why I don't think it's disinformation. And by their own admission, it was a belief system they had. They weren't saying, oh, we have actual proof that this is correct. They admitted it was their belief system. And I think in a disinformation game, the disinformants usually try and offer something far more convincing than just, oh, well, this is our opinion, our belief. Because they want the disinfo up to work. They want to dangle something in front of you that looks, credible and believable. So.
Well, here's something that I think about a lot. I picture there being one source of energy that's like the creator of our planet and of the universe, and then like every culture or, civilization taps into that source, and then they form like a religion to try to understand it on some level. And if you look at all the different cultures and belief systems, not all of them, but most of them, they all have some crazy friggin' the whole shit house is going to go up in flames at the end kind of scenario, from the Aramaic to Christian. And one thing that really gave me the creeps recently is we were interviewing Nancy Red Star about the natives, and then she started talking about this purification by fire. Like, they all think everything's about to burn too. So it's like every culture has this same view that everything is about to burn, get purified by fire, some kind of transformation or apocalypse.
It keeps everybody in line. Keeps everybody in line.
Yeah, that's what basically, I'm not denying the existence of some sort of life after death or that there could be some sort of creator, but all mainstream religions basically are designed to control people, and they do through two ways, fear and guilt. Fear that if you don't go to church on Sunday, you'll burn in hell, and the guilt that if you do this and you're told you shouldn't do that, you're going to go to hell. And it's a belief system and a control system. Primarily, unfortunately, today, mainstream religion is becoming more of a control system. It's literally to put the fear of God into people. To me, people should realize that a belief system is simply that, a belief, and it should be taught, I think, as a belief system. All religions should be taught as belief systems, I think, not as hard fact. We can talk about hard fact that, the ocean's made of water because we can go out and test it. We can't talk about hell being as hard fact because even if there is a hell, nobody's gone there and come back. It's like, it's not testable. It's theoretical.
So when it comes to these beings who are supposedly aliens or whatever you want to call them, some say fallen angels, demons, aliens, in your perspective and research, does it seem like there is indeed, a group of beings who are definitely like experimenting on mankind in a way that's completely evil?
Well, yeah, I think John Keel made a lot of good points in this area, that people who get into the UFO subject, not, I would say always, but, it often ends in sort of very weird, mysterious circumstances, tragedies, immense bad luck, and people often just, the countless stories of people getting out the subject, dumping the files, and then it's like the black cloud lifts, as if something's got their grips into them. Now, as I said, this is where I do agree with the group. I don't believe we're dealing with something as simplistic as alien scientists coming here in metal ships to steal our DNA or whatever, the conventional scenario. I don't think that is the case at all, because there's far too many parallels between today's abduction stories and, shall we say, fairy encounters in the 1500s. Now, before anybody listening to this, who's got a blog and runs off and types some message tonight saying Nick Redfern believes in fairies, I don't.
Wee folk.
The wee folk, exactly. But what
Breaking news.
yeah, exactly, yeah. But what I do believe is that this phenomenon has the ability to masquerade in archetypal forms relevant to different folklores and belief systems. Now, if you look at, for example, the fairy encounters, say, of the 1600s in England, you had people who would, they'd go out in the woods, they'd feel disorientated, and they'd see like a fairy ring as they became known on the ground. Then these little goblin-type creatures would appear. The person would be taken to the fairy kingdom where they'd mate with the fairy queen. So you have like the reproduction angle as well. And they'd come back and they'd find there's been a distortion of time, which is like today's missing time. So in other words, the parallels are undeniable. But, we're clearly from the descriptions dealing with creatures that look nothing like the Greys. And you can go back 2,000 years to ancient Babylonian tales, earlier than that, where sort of predatory vampiric creatures would come in people's bedrooms at night, and they would disguise themselves as owls. Now, in today's abduction stories, we hear stories of people having screen memories of seeing like a large owl in the road and getting home, and 2 hours has gone by, and then they start having weird dreams about aliens. So in other words, the phenomenon, I believe, isn't extraterrestrial. I don't know what it is, whether it's interdimensional, extra-dimensional, who knows what it is, but there's something that interacts with the human race, and it kind of, for some reason, it needs us. Now, the Collins elite, their conclusion was very sort of ominous, and a lot of people who read the book got quite disturbed by this. They conclude that essentially the human soul, the life force, is something that scientifically or technologically, if you like, can be extracted from the human body, either in death or while you're living. And these entities are supposedly although they can manifest in what looks like a physical form, they're supposed to, according to the group, exist in the form of pure energy. And they literally feed on human souls. They're almost like a parasitic entity. And they actually interviewed a number of people who claimed to have had near-death experiences and who'd seen what the group came to describe as literal soul factories where, in the afterlife, the moment you die, these entities take a grip on our soul. And, it was almost described to me like a weird combination of sort of archaic rite and ritual and some sort of supernatural realm, but also that blended with highly advanced technology. One of the group members actually described it to me as kind of being similar to the scene or the scenario in the Matrix films where, Keanu Reeves is in the real world and then he kind of wakes up and, he suddenly finds he's in this factory where all these bodies, all these people are just laid out endlessly in tanks. And the group believes it's like that the Earth is a farm where these entities don't want to help us, they don't want to destroy us, they want to maintain the herd because on our physical death they take hold of and recycle and then feed on human souls, like a literal factory type environment. That's what they believe hell is, like some sort of extra dimension where we're essentially like the cattle going to the slaughterhouse.
Yeah, the whole soul harvesting thing reminds me of the movie Phantasm. Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing is that this has actually been mentioned previously, this angle about harvesting souls. John Mack's books, he interviewed a number of abductees who said that the so-called Greys, he felt that they were trying to steal their souls. Bob Lazar, now although Bob Lazar is a highly controversial character, he said that when he was allegedly at Area 51, he read documents saying that the aliens, their biggest desire, or the most important thing, was that the so-called containers weren't damaged, and that we were what the aliens called containers. And when somebody asked him, well, what are the containers? Why are they important? Because they contain souls, and it was the souls that these entities were interested in. Now, who knows if Lazar, his story's valid, or even if he wasn't fed disinformation. We just don't know. But, this angle of sort of soul-stealing predatory creatures, that's throughout all religions. All religions have that idea, that your soul, if there is such a thing as a soul, it can go here or it can go there. But this group, as I said, took it a stage further, and they actually believe that, like in the Matrix scenario where the machines feed on like human electricity, that these things literally feed on a poorly defined energy derived from the human soul. And that's why they don't land and say hello, but they don't destroy us. They have no interest in doing either. They're kind of like the farmer, just carefully nurturing the animals until the time comes, to ship them off for food.
Well, every creature on Earth, you would think would have some sort of, energy that gives it some sort of, you know what I mean? And so why would you think it would just be us that they would, be harvesting and not,
Well, no, that's actually a very good point.
I think this comes from humans, the human perspective, our ego, to where everything's about us, and they're after our souls, and they're after, you know what I mean? We're like the anointed one.
Yeah, I do actually mention one bit in the book where one abductee told me how she was actually approached, a woman named Tammy Stone, who I interviewed for the book, and she told me how she'd had an abduction experience and was approached by a couple of Air Force intelligence guys who I was never able to prove were attached to the Collins elite, but the time period and the questions they were asking pretty much convinced me that they were, but admittedly I couldn't prove it. There may well have been some other group, and apparently there were 2 or 3 groups in the military and government that followed these same belief systems. But anyway, they asked her if she had any views on life after death in animals, and I put that in the book. So that's kind of interesting, that they were looking at that as well. But again, you're quite right. Christian teachings suggest that only humans have souls. Other religions believe that all living things have some sort of life force. So, again, somebody's right, somebody's wrong, or everybody's wrong, if there's no soul. So, again, their views on this were highly controversial, and much of it, by their own admission, was derived from interviewing people who'd had near-death experiences and had reported seeing what the group came to term these like huge soul factories, of, as I said, kind of like something out of the Matrix. It was a very bleak scenario of kind of like, imagine like a big black open void with these sort of mechanical insect-like creatures, just almost like a vacuum cleaner, like sucking a lit up energy from these.
So, Nick, is there any what do they say is the solution to battling this? Is it Jesus Christ? Jesus H. Christ, right?
Yeah, literally. Yeah, their belief system is that this phenomenon can actually be held at bay by not denying its existence, but denying its ability to interact with us. In other words, if we, I guess it's kind of like if you're sort of faced with a lion, the lion can tell if you're frightened of it. Or a dog, a dog can tell that, and a dog gets antsy and it might sort of bite you or, sort of take the upper hand when it realizes, you're the weaker party. But they concluded that actual denial, strong personal belief and denial of these entities to interact with us could hold them at bay. If you could put up a barrier to prevent like a psychic abduction of your mind or whatever, you could keep them at bay from invading your space, things like that. And so their conclusion was that, well, how do we convince people that this is correct? And how do we make the entire population be so not just fearful of these entities, but so strongly driven that they can hold them at bay? And they came to like to me at least, a highly disturbing conclusion that the only way to to save literally the souls of the population, was to slowly introduce a far more radical form of Christianity, where people literally would, be I guess, not just taught it, but, it would be instilled in you from the earliest of ages that this is what's going on and this is how you can defeat these things. And that their view was that if that helps save the population, by ruling the country with like an iron rod of a radical form of Christianity, then if it's going to save people's souls, then that's what we're going to have to do. Now, the fact is that religion is starting to play a far greater role in government. That's an absolute fact. Even in the military, there's been a huge debate, and a lot of soldiers have gone on record very angry the fact that many of the military leaders are actually kind of saying that, this isn't just a war in the Middle East against an enemy. This is, a fight for one religion versus another, turning it like a religious crusade, like an indoctrination type situation. So, in other words, we actually are seeing some of the things the group talked about actually happening, a deeper religion playing more of a role in the official world, and and how that impacts on the population and the military and everybody else. So that was their viewpoint. But again, to what extent it's viable, it's dependent upon their viewpoint being correct as to whether or not it would even work.
Well, just the fact that they exist is pretty scary to me.
Oh yeah,
we have high level, you have high level intelligent people, who are probably, working during the Cold War with the Russians and, all that crazy stuff doing there, and having these conversations about,
No,
you're right.
Freaking John Carpenter movie, man. It's freaking scary.
Yeah, for me, I don't, as I said, I don't care what people's beliefs are. So I'm not here to knock them or uphold them, because I truthfully admit I don't know what the truth is, and I don't know how we can know the truth. People can have a deep faith or not, but if they say they know for a fact, they're deluding themselves. But that's beside the point. I think in governments, people in governments, if you're elected, you should be elected to do the job you do. Your religious beliefs shouldn't come into it. For example, that's one of the big things I found, originally living in England, that between the English elections and the American elections, is that it always seems to be the case that American politicians have to feel they have to talk about their religious beliefs or non-beliefs. In England, nobody cares. I wouldn't bother me in the slightest if the Prime Minister was a total atheist. I'm not interested in his religious beliefs or her religious beliefs. I'm interested in knowing if the politician in concern can lower taxes, balance the budget, reduce unemployment, increase health care. I don't care what they think happened on the cross 2,000 years ago. It's not relevant to their job. And yet what I found is happening, I think, more here, is that politicians feel not only do they have to talk about religion more and show themselves to be of a religious nature, but it's playing more of a role in governments as well. And, in other areas also, I think, it's just kind of education, I said the military, it's, maybe it's just a symptom of society, I don't know. Or, you could argue it is somehow connected with this sort of plan to save ourselves by hook or by crooks.
Yeah, it's, the reason they do that, I think, is because most of the, the Bible Belt stuff, the people there a lot of them are just, the lowest common denominator, and that's how they're going to vote. Well, if he doesn't believe in God, then I'm not voting for him type thing. What I mean?
Yeah, and to me that's a shame that people have that mindset, because, your vote should be based on who can actually run the government. What a person does on a Sunday morning should be irrelevant. I sleep in. If I was a politician, would it really make any? If I was a politician, I was really skilled in the world of economics, and I had a good plan to balance the budget. It should not matter if I sleep in on a Sunday or I go to church, providing I can do that job. Religion should not play any role in that, any more than a belief system in anything should, believe in Santa Claus, in a kid. It's kind of like that doesn't play any role in their education, but it's still it's a belief system that millions of kids believe until they realize they were lied to for years. So why should a belief system in government play any sort of role? It shouldn't. Facts should play a role.
But in America, you have Christian to be the president, of course.
I
don't understand why that is. Why?
They're crazy.
Well, no. I actually don't think they are crazy. I think it's just, it's upbringing. That's all it is. But it's not my. As I said, it's not my place to. As I said, I wouldn't criticize anybody's belief system because, it's not impacting upon me. If somebody tells me I'm going to burn in hell because I don't believe this or that, or I don't know, then I will react. But, if somebody just happens to believe something and they want to go to church on Sunday, to me that's fine. It's when it starts impacting on other people's lives from the perspective of they know better than I do and you better listen. That's when it gets problematic. And I think that's what that happened with the Collins elite, that they started off looking at all the different theories, came to the occult theory, but then as time went on and they got more and more, I guess, just down the literal Christian path, that what happened was this is the answer, and they got more and more support from people in government who supported that answer, to where it eventually just became accepted as that and nothing else, which is, to me, it's like a disaster, because an open-minded think tank should be entirely that. It shouldn't be, one particular theory driven, if you like.
Well, what is the theory about a demonic link to Roswell?
Oh, yeah, this is one of the weirdest aspects of the entire story. And this is actually told to me and told to Ray Bochet as well. Why this is important in the one sense is because this is probably the only group in government, granted, they're not necessarily spoken out officially, but this is, as far as I know, the only group in government that actually concludes, or officially and I guess publicly to an extent, concludes that something anomalous, non-human did happen at Roswell. The Air Force first said it was a flying disc, but then it was a weather balloon, now it's a mogul balloon and crash test dummies, and everybody else can't find any files, and so that's where things are at. This group actually believes something non-human really did happen, but they had a very, very strange belief system about the wreckage. They actually don't believe that anything literally crashed at Roswell. What they believed was that it was a staged event, like a Trojan horse, to try and influence and make us think that what came down was like an extraterrestrial craft that malfunctioned. So in other words, these entities were trying to present themselves as vulnerable and present themselves as aliens. And Ray Bochet said, well, what about the wreckage? Ray, as an Anglican priest, pointed out that, teachings suggest if these things, demonic things, don't actually have physical form, how is it that wreckage or materials could be found? And the group essentially said something along the lines of that, well, these entities, they may be energy-based, but they can literally pluck matter and manipulate it, kind of like a cosmic alchemy, if like the old alchemy from centuries ago where people would turn base metal into gold and things like that, allegedly using ancient magical rites, etc., and different technologies. And they conclude it was something like that literally matter had been plucked from somewhere else, manipulated, remodeled, and literally dropped or tossed onto the desert floor. And then, of course, the big question is, well, what about the bodies? And they literally came to believe the same thing, that the bodies found at Roswell were real, but they had never existed. They were kind of like, imagine like dropping a mannequin in the desert. Of course, it's made of plastic or whatever. Everybody knows what plastic is. But they concluded that these entities literally had the ability to sort of create a creature that had never lived, but manipulate it so it was DNA-based. It would have flesh, blood, bones, etc., but it would all be like an alchemy, and the creature would never have lived. But it was just like it was manipulated into sort of biological form, whereas the debris was manipulated into like a metallic form. And that was their literal belief. They they hold to that theory that, you know, it was like a demonic alchemy and a Trojan horse. And as I said, it's notable on the one sense because it's the only time, you know, there are people in governments, a think tank, if you like, who've actually concluded that, yes, Roswell was not human or not earthly even, but it's equally, I think, the most bizarre theory that the debunkers or the believers have come up with, you know. But what's weird is that Jack Parsons, one of his colleagues, who was a man who was a father figure to him, was a man named Theodore von Karman, again a brilliant rocket expert. And Theodore von Karman was actually, in the 1500s, had a relative who supposedly conjured up a golem, which is a creature from Jewish legend, which again is like a manufactured life form. And the group thought there must be a tie-in here, that Parsons knew von Karman, and von Karman had a relative who had conjured up one of these entities, and Parsons had supposedly tried to conjure up one when he was killed in 1952 in an explosion in his lab. And von Karman was also a colleague of a man named Robert Goddard, another brilliant rocket scientist, who actually had his base of operations at none other than in the town of Roswell. So, you know, you have these sort of very weird links and strands to the Roswell story, and people like Parsons, all interlinked again with Roswell. You know, so again, these were areas that were making the group think, well, you know, we've got to be on the right track.
You know, I would think the aliens would have been more resourceful. I don't think that would have been a good plan, you know, for Roswell.
Well, yeah.
I mean, you think if they're traversing time and everything like that, then they're, you know, dropping. You know, I'd like to see them sitting around a room coming up with that idea, you know, to do that. Well, I think that if they were going to do that, they would have did it on a bigger scale. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, again, the important thing is to point out, you know, that that this is a belief system. I mean, in terms of Ray Boucher, as I said, was told exactly the same scenario as me. So I don't think it was disinformation. I really think it was these guys sitting around and thinking, well, we know something happened at Roswell, but how is that explainable from our Christian perspective? And if these things are demonic, how could it be done? Now, by their own admission, these guys, this is an important thing, they weren't the sort of the keepers of the Roswell secret. You know, they may have actually known more than most of us, but for a long time, they didn't know any more than the average UFO research. You know, that they actually gave me copies of several of their reports, some of which I reproduce extracts of in the book, where much of their information, certainly in years gone by, came from open source literature like Charles Berlitz's and Bill Moore's book, The Roswell Incident. You know, this is a group in government who could not get the answers from the government, but they realized something was going on because they were reading, you know, the published works of people in the UFO research community. So, in other words, these guys were forced to come to a conclusion because they weren't the ones sort of, you know, who the custodians of the hangar or the underground chamber where the materials were kept. You know, they were scrambling around for answers because they didn't know, you know, where the proof was hidden, you know, if there is proof being hidden even.
Yeah, just trying to make sense of, just to put it in their little belief box, you know what I mean, make it, you know, relevant or whatever.
Yeah, and again,
I got you.
And again, this is why I don't think it's disinformation, because I think if it was, they would have said to me something along the line to try and prove to me that it was real. I think they would have said something like, oh yeah, we're the guys who got the debris and the wreckage, and we've examined it, and we know for a fact this theory is correct. You know, that I think is the way they would have spread it if it was disinformation, to really try and convince me and Ray. But instead of just saying, well, you know, our teachings suggest that maybe these entities can manipulate matter, and maybe that's what was found in the desert. You know, that doesn't sound to me like disinformation. It does sound like a bunch of guys coming up with an idea because that's what they believe. So.
Right. Hey, Nick. Hey, listen, guys. We've got about 1 minute before we go to break, and after that, we'll come back for our second hour. So, Nick, you got a website or anything like that you want to plug real quick?
Yeah, I've got nickredfern.com. I've actually got a blog for the Final Events book, which is eventsfinal.blogspot.com. I couldn't get finalevents.blogspot.com, so I had to do it back front.
Dang, Christian stole it.
Somebody stole it.
I'll swallow your soul! All right, we're going on break for like 10 minutes, Nick. Just
Okay.
You can stay on the phone, but if you need to set it down or whatever.
No, I'm just going to do that for a couple of minutes.
All right.
All right, cool. Thanks.
I'll swallow your soul. I'll swallow your Welcome back to the Church of Mabus. We're here with Nick Redfern, author of Final Events and the Secret Government Group on Demonic UFOs in the Afterlife, in a show entitled, My Name is Legion, for We Are Many. Boo. So, basically, Nick, did they come to any conclusion as far as, what a grand scale scenario would be that would be Armageddon or Judgment Day or final events that they thought that was going to take place or anything like that when it's all finished, the finale, so to speak?
Yeah, their conclusion, they take sort of very much a typical sort of regular, Christian approach to it. They believe there's going to be a fight between good and evil, and they believe that the evil will manifest in a form that will deceive the people of that era, and they believe the final battle is coming, so the archetypal form that we're likely to most be deceived by is visiting extraterrestrials, and they believe that there will be some sort of huge showing in the sky of kind of like an Independence Day thing, of craft, etc. But they believe it may well be holographic in nature, like holograms, rather than, we're not talking about literal craft because, they'd say these entities are more energy-based than physical, but they can take on or manifest certain appearances, and they believe it's almost like a highly sophisticated hologram, kind of something like the Matrix, if you like, where you literally do believe, what you're seeing. And they believe that, this will happen, and then there'll be somebody on Earth who will kind of, be the spokesperson of the, quote, aliens, and this person will actually be the Antichrist. And then it'll be like the countdown between, the battle between God and the Antichrist, Satan, etc. And then, all bets are off then, who goes where, depending on what you've done in this life. But it'll be, the whole rapture, Judgment Day, everything. They believe that because that's their belief system, and they've added the whole UFO motif to explain how it fits in, but that is what they concluded. So.
Yeah, it'll be Mabus, the dark Antichrist, Lord of Hell. Well, the thing is now with the whole scenario, even if this did happen, let's say if it did happen, what if? Now people are like, it's our government doing it to us. It's a false flag attack. Our government's doing it to cause New World Order. There's all kinds of
talk about that. Yeah, I mentioned that in the book.
Yeah.
They talked about, although one of the guys said that, he said, I don't think the plan's in progress, but apparently there was some sort of round table thing, like a discussion of, what would happen if we need to get the people behind us to really create this belief system that can hold these entities at bay. If they're not going to listen to us, we might have to convince them. And what about if we actually faked like a huge hologram in the sky, like Return of Jesus or something like that? Would it convince enough people that their combined energy, if you like, would keep these entities at bay?
Well, there's stories that I've heard about the military or whoever using holograms of Allah on terrorists to make them confess, and there was some other story about they were going to like invade Cuba and like do Jesus in the sky to cause unrest. So there are some weird little stories out there. I don't know if they're true about hologram weirdness.
The Cuban one is, yeah. It wasn't so much like a highly sophisticated hologram. This was actually back in the 60s. The plan was to try and basically like using highly sophisticated projection equipment and project like imagery of Jesus onto a cloud. You know, so if you're driving home late at night and you see some of these like spinning lights from a nightclub or whatever reflecting on the clouds, that sort of thing. That was the original plan, that they would project an image of Jesus onto the clouds. And this was actually an official CIA project. And the idea was that they would project them when sort of like Western forces would invade Cuba, giving the implication that, you know, Jesus was right behind us, so to speak. Now, of course, that didn't go ahead. You know, maybe it was too technologically advanced for the time, and how would you get all the equipment on Cuba to project it on the clouds? How could you predict that clouds would even be there on the day, you know? So, but the idea of faking religious imagery in the sky actually goes back a long time. And you can find official files on this that have now been declassified through the Freedom of Information Act, showing that the idea at least was discussed. But as one of the guys told me, you know, it's a long way from discussing it to actually having highly sophisticated technology ready to go and pulling it off and convincing everybody as well. So.
I'm sure they got all that still on the table too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I think, you know, that anything that can be done to put the population more under somebody's control, you know, I think that's what certain players want. You know, it's a weird world we live in today where it's changed radically, and you know, the whole point is to keep people in a state of fear and control, basically.
So, like today, I was putting up on my Facebook. Since Tim sent me a copy of that, I promoted it on my Facebook wall, and somebody was like, "Why do you have to put these fearful stories on your wall? Yada, yada, yada." And I tried to explain to him. He was like, "Well, discs don't ever hurt anybody, or there's no, you know, negative UFO." And I started to talk about the story where I can't remember, what were their names, where they got radiation burns and tried to sue the government.
Down in Texas, the Cash Landrum case. Betty Cash and Vicky Landrum. Yeah.
Well, what are some pretty negative, horrible, evil, ferocious alien stories that you know as far as them interacting with humankind on a level that's just terrifying? Is there any you could tell us?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of the weirder ones, you know, are where people have had just very strange, ominous things going on in the house, like abductions, for example. I mean, I talk about this in the book, but I mean, I've also interviewed a number of abductees who have had like very weird and menacing poltergeist activity in the house after they've had an abduction experience. You know, that's difficult to reconcile something like that with just the idea of, you know, being kidnapped by alien scientists and having your DNA scooped out or whatever. You know, why would there be like this sort of residual effect of poltergeist activity for weeks later? Why would the people start to get sick and have ill health problems and weird synchronicities going on? You know, it's things like this where, you know, that lead me to believe they're not literally extraterrestrial. They could be something else. But equally, there are these negative things that have a very adverse effect on people. Also, for example, you know, if we touch upon things like the Men in Black stories that people like John Keel chronicled in the 60s, you know, where they're talking about what sound like almost like sort of, again, like energy-sucking creatures rather than sort of flesh and blood government agents as many people assume them to be. People, again, talking about sort of weird nightmares of seeing these Men in Black, you know, days later, and just, again, strange things going on in the house and ill health again, and negative atmospheres, if you like, where they felt they had the house cleansed and things like that. So you get a lot of stories like that. But mainstream ufology, the people who want to uphold the extraterrestrial angle no matter what because it's good for business, they just don't want to hear about things like that. You know, they want to hear Area 51, Miguel reports, pilot encounters. They don't want to hear about, poltergeist activity after somebody said that they got abducted by greys, because that's not good for business.
Yeah, and it's a belief system, just like a religion.
Yeah, ufology, is a belief system, and it's no different. I mean, from my perspective, I always tell people I believe wholeheartedly that there is a genuine UFO phenomenon. And the reason I believe is because there's a preponderance of evidence. What there isn't is a preponderance of evidence that gives us a convincing answers to the nature of that phenomenon. It demonstrates there is a phenomenon, but if you put a viewpoint on it or a spin on it that it's time travelers or it's crypto-terrestrials or it's aliens or it's demons or it's something interdimensional creatures, whatever, you're putting a belief system onto a phenomenon that we don't really understand. And, I try not to do that. And sometimes it annoys people because people say, well, what do you actually believe? And I say, well, I believe there's a phenomenon. They're like, well, is it alien? I'm saying, I don't know. And they're like, could it be, it could be this, it could be that. And people don't want that. They want a hard answer. But the problem is, if you're honest with yourself, it is difficult to say it's this, because there's no way really to know it is this or that. It could well be. Who knows? If time travel's real, maybe it really is people from the far future, and they look back into our history and say, okay, let's see what the people at that time believed, and when we go back, we'll use that motif to camouflage our activities behind. That's as plausible as anything else. So.
Yeah, to do that, though. I mean, we do that with music and people and everything. Everything's labeled and categorized, and, we've been doing that since day one. And
well, I think the reason why that is, go on.
People just can't be satisfied with the mystery and walking the road. They have to think they got to immediately find the answer to it, and then prove me wrong type thing. My path in this whole thing is just walking that road. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think why the reason for that is because human beings, we're not certainly unique. There's a lot of animals beyond us that have skills and talents, that we can't even replicate. No human being can make a spider's web. It sounds simplistic, but there are a lot of animals that can do things far beyond what we can do. However, I think our brains are pretty unique in the sense that we're always asking questions, and we realize that we're on a limited time span, and a lot of people can't face the fact that, let's say there is no life after death. I'm speculating. A lot of people cannot face the fact that, well, I'm an important person. There's got to be more to me than 80 years, and then it's all over. They can't. They cannot face that possibility. Now, for me, the possibility is real, and my view is that that's why I live every day, to its fullest, because one day it will be, without being getting all doom and depressive. One day it's going to be a day. So live your life while you've got it. But the thing is, as human beings, the way our brains are made, we think about that, so we want answers. The average lion out in the jungle just wants to feed himself, every day and feed his family. He doesn't sit up looking at the stars wondering what it's all about. But we do, because our brains are highly evolved enough to do that. So I think that's why we have belief systems, because we think about things. Animals exist. Yes, they're highly advanced, but they think more along a primal level. I truly don't believe, our dogs, for example, are highly intelligent, faithful friends, but I don't believe dogs, when they're lying by the fire, are thinking, well, what happens after death and things like that. Maybe there is life after death in the animal kingdom, but I don't believe they're literally having conversations in their head like that. We do, because we realize we're immortal, etc. So I think that's why we have so many myths, legends, belief systems, because we're thinking all the time, and we want answers, and we want to know what this is, what does that mean? And so we then construct whole scenarios as a result of, the fact that we do have highly developed brains, most of us.
So, Nick, I know you've done books on monster hunting and, like the British Bigfoot and, a lot of cryptids and stuff like that. In your of investigating and going out and stuff, what are some beings that are experiences you've run across with things that are, evidence as far as actually seeing what types of beings, or have you actually had experiences where you've seen them or stuff like that?
Mhm. Well, most of my experiences, unfortunately, have kind of, I mean, they've been interesting, but it's mainly been things, finding footprints, tracks, sometimes hearing like very weird noises out in the woods. Obviously interviewing a lot of witnesses, seeing photographs, things along those lines, which I guess most of us who do UFO research can relate to. It's going out and checking out landing sites and interviewing people. It's what we're all looking for, is that sort of, cryptozoology. You mentioned that. It's like finding a body of Bigfoot on the road or whatever. And, a lot of my cryptozoological beliefs, relative to creatures like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Yeti, kind of parallel my beliefs in respect to UFOs. But I think when you look at these creatures at first glance, they sound just like regular animals that science hasn't found yet, in the same way that people say, well, the UFOs are piloted by regular aliens that we haven't, proved yet or whatever. But the more you look into these cryptozoological creatures, they don't just seem weird, they seem almost too weird. They're beyond elusive. Nobody ever hits Bigfoot in the car. Nobody ever finds Bigfoot dead at the side of the road, died of old age. The people talked about how they've tried to shoot these creatures and the bullets have had no effect. And also people seeing like a Bigfoot-type creature at the edge of the road, and as they're approaching the car, the headlights and the engine have failed. There are a number of high-quality reports from people of Loch Ness trying to photograph the Loch Ness Monster for their camera to jam or the photographs not to come out. So, it's like regular animals can't do things like that. It's not possible. So, again, I think we're looking possibly at something that's multi-dimensional entities that have sort of residual effects that can perhaps have an adverse effect on us and, our technological systems and electrical systems possibly. It sounds bizarre, but there are reports of these creatures sort of flitting in and out of our existence. 1 minute they're here, the next they're gone. And, of course, the other big issue a lot of people forget about is the food issue. For example, a fully grown silverback gorilla eats approximately 45 pounds of food a day. That's just one. Bigfoot is described like 7-8 foot tall and 400 to 500 pounds. Well, you imagine the amount of food that would have to be eaten on a daily basis just to sustain one, never mind a colony big enough to where you don't have like inbreeding and ill health and everything else that goes along with that. And yet, where these creatures are often seen, places like the Pacific Northwest woods, well, if you're like an 8 foot tall creature weighing 500 pounds, you're not going to get by on 2 apples and a few berries a day, not unless after a couple of weeks you want to look like a stick insect or whatever, some sort of Hollywood bulimic supermodel or something. Right. So, in other words, the food intake for these creatures has to be massive, but the problem is we never see hard evidence of this massive feeding. It's just very occasional, somebody say, oh, I saw Bigfoot pulling apples from a tree or stealing salt out of somebody's salt cellar. We don't see reports of every week in one particular area where Bigfoot's seen. We aren't seeing, for example, half a dozen sheep or cows being mutilated and ripped apart. Those sort of reports are very infrequent. But if we're talking about whole colonies in the thousands or high hundreds of these creatures all across the US, we should see far more strange deaths on farms and of normal household animals and, or trees just uprooted or apple orchards and things like orange orchards just torn to pieces. But we're just not seeing it. It's like, these things like UFOs, they appear to as one thing, but the further you dig into it, they seem to be something else entirely.
Nick, me and Michael were talking about a story, and I think it was from Tom Hartman's book, The Locals, I think, but it was a story of a Bigfoot being found in a fiery field, and they took it on an ambulance or something. Do you know that story?
No, I don't know that story, no, but there's a few stories like that where, for example, stories about government agencies supposedly finding Bigfoot bodies. There's a long-standing story about how on Mount St. Helens in 1980, when there was the volcanic eruption, that supposedly the army went in and pulled out sort of these huge, hairy, dead bodies and airlifted them out of the area on helicopters to some unknown location. Just linking cryptozoology with government secrecy and things like this, and, people said, well, they were taken to this hospital or that hospital, and, it doesn't mean there's nothing to it. It just means, unfortunately, it's kind of like the stories of alien bodies, being recovered and held in cryogenic storage. It doesn't mean they're not true. It just means we have a lot of interesting testimony, but so far, we don't have the definitive evidence. What we need is somebody who can say, here's how we can get you into the place, and here's the bodies, and, then we take the bodies out.
Yeah, I think it was that story, very similar to that, where you just mentioned the same thing.
Yeah.
So what do you think about all... Oh, sorry. What do you think about all the, as far as the governments are concerned in Britain and America? I mean, lately in America, the news about UFOs, and Britain, they just released all the files. I keep up with UFOs in the media a lot because I just like to keep up with it. It's fascinating. But as far as, like Kepler just found 500 million or billion alien planets, they said. I don't know why they call them alien planets, but do you think there's some kind of level that's leading to some kind of ultimate statement by the government about other life out there? Because, I mean, it seems like they're doing weird stuff, like the Vatican suddenly talking about space brothers, love your space brothers, and then next thing you know, the government's, NASA releases Kepler found all these planets that, could have life on them. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff going on lately during, the time now.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of files surfacing from various countries, and, some people suggested it's some sort of program of disclosure. Other people quite rightly point to the fact, that files have been surfacing for a long time. It's just that the media... I mean, the British government has released on average 500 pages of UFO files every year since 1991. But nobody heard about the 500 or 600 pages in 91, 92. Most people don't even know about that. They've just looked at the past few years because the media's picked up on the fact. Prior to that, there was many files surfacing back 20 years ago, but there wasn't a huge interest in UFOs. There was no internet. The files weren't put online. They were just put onto the shelves, and if people want to find them, you go and look for them. So, you can look at it both ways, but I will also admit that, these stories at the Vatican and, coming out with statements about UFOs and how it's okay to believe in aliens, you do have to wonder if, sort of a button's being pressed and slowly there is some sort of acclimatization program. Now, the main reason I sort of urge caution on this is because we know that in the past there have been similar statements made. For example, if you go back to the early 80s, Linda Howe, for example, was approached by Air Force Intelligence and was, basically said, we want you to work on a documentary which will help prepare the public. Well, this was 83. There was a story that when the MJ-12 documents surfaced in 87, this was going to be some part of some preparation program, to truth as well. So we've seen similar things like that in the past, but I will admit, certainly not on the scale that we're seeing it today. But the other argument is it we're seeing things on a larger scale, or is it just with things like the internet, everybody gets to learn about it, whereas before, it was just a few thousand people who happened to read UFO magazines or whatever. Today everybody hears about it.
Look at our technology now and how we're able to, find planets and different solar systems and stuff like that. Just think about what a civilization, how advanced it is. A civilization that advanced, what they're seeing.
Well, yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, the important thing is, I think, it's like if these creatures, whatever they are, whether they're extraterrestrial, interdimensional, whatever, they clearly exist. However, if they're here, which they clearly are, then it seems to be the case that if disclosure is going to happen, it's down to us. I don't see any evidence that these creatures, want to be the ones to disclose. When you said what they do, what are they finding? Whatever their relationship is to us, it seems to be that open interaction with us isn't part of their agenda. So, unless we have sort of the proverbial landing on the White House lawn, or outside the Kremlin or wherever, or, in the worst case scenario, we get attacked. But neither of those have happened. So, it's like if disclosure, unless we see a radical change in the way the phenomenon works, You know, no matter how advanced these entities are or what they're up to, they don't seem to want to share with us what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, well, I wouldn't either. You know what I mean?
No.
No, really, dude. I mean, I really wouldn't, you know, if I was, I mean, I'd get blown up. You get shot, you get burned up, whatever. I mean, unless you got like a Gort with you, you know, protecting your ass, you know, but really, I mean, they probably looked at us and went, holy crap, you know, we got to tiptoe around these people. Maybe they're here for dolphins or whales or crickets. I mean, who knows? Yeah, I mean, we're just in the way.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of our ego, is that if they're coming here, the main reason is for us. You know, I think certainly things like abductions were clearly part of whatever their agenda is, but it doesn't mean that's the main agenda. You know, I think it's probably like us. You know, people say, are they good or evil? Well, nothing's that simple. You know, human beings aren't good or evil. We're all capable of being good or evil in varying degrees and amounts. You know what I mean?
And dude, that's a good and evil is relative. Somebody's good, maybe somebody else is evil. You know what I mean, or vice versa.
Okay.
It all depends on your, like we've been talking about, your belief system, or you know how you were programmed or brought up or whatever. And most of these things that we call good or evil are just our nature anyway. You know what I mean?
And I don't think it can. You can. You know, people aren't just good or evil. You know, a lot of it depends on circumstances. And I think if you look at what we do, most of what we do, the human race, we do it because it helps us. It's self-serving. And I would be very surprised if an alien race did anything itself that wasn't self-serving. You know, I don't believe out the kindness of their heart they're going to cure cancer and save the rainforest, because they haven't done that. You know,
right.
Things are just getting worse in the planet, really, and I see no evidence that anyone's tried to help us. So, you know, whatever their reason is, my view is it's from their own perspective what it's been done for. It's not being done to, you know, we've got to help the humans. You know, look at what they've done to themselves. You know.
There seems to be.
It seems like also that, like, you know, Hollywood and all the movies, like there's like 6 or 7 alien invasion movies coming out this year that are just pure, like, horror, like, just horror, evil aliens eating us, you know. There's some weird Apollo 8 movie coming out where it's going to be just like a horror movie. I think the only good alien movie that came out this year is Paul, which I loved. It was hilarious with Simon Pegg and all that stuff. That was really funny, but that's like the only good alien movie coming out. Well, there's that number 4, but that didn't do very good. But I know Spielberg's putting out a TV series that's the same thing, you know, evil aliens. But my point is, let me make my point. Damn it. My point is, no matter what the alien scenario, once it gets introduced to the public, you can bet your ass the government's going to use it to try to, you know, they'll be the next terrorists. Aliens are coming to do this, to control us. It's like they're going to label, you know, it's like terrorists are the things that are coming to kill us now. So if aliens get introduced by the government to our society, of course there's going to be like a faction of evil aliens that they got to protect us from so they can stay in power and control us.
You're right. I mean, fear is, you know, a major control factor in life. You know, it's that's just, you know, in any life form. You know, it's like it's survival, and your instinct is to survive. When something threatens it, you try and help yourself, and then if you can't help yourself, people look to the government for help. You know, that's what happens, and
they'll keep
be exploited.
Yeah, and they'll keep doing it because it keeps working.
Yeah, I mean, as long as people, you know, live in fear. I mean, you know, people shouldn't live in fear. You know, people should not live in fear.
Dude, I remember coming home from work. Go ahead, man.
No, go on.
I remember coming home from work. This was like 2002, and I'd taken the train, and I was walking down this road, and here's 4 or 5 people duct taping plastic over their windows. And I'm like, what's going on? They just said, go out and buy all the duct tape and plastic you can and put it up on your windows. There's going to be a chemical attack and all this stuff. And I said, let's stop a chemical getting into your house. What are you doing?
Tom Ridge, he made that, told everybody to do that, didn't he?
Well, yeah, he was just being a good soldier, but it was all BS. He came out and said it was all BS later. But, you know, people just jumped up and went and bought duct tape and plastic, you know, without even questioning anything, without even thinking for themselves. You know, they were letting other people and another whatever think for them. And it's no different than any other religion or whatever club, you know. You're told what to do, and that's what you do.
Yeah, and if you don't do it, you know, it's like, well,
you're going to die.
Yeah, something bad will happen, you know.
Well, that's, I know I've seen some things on Facebook about schools, like doing drills for alien invasion for kids. And there was, like, another thing, there's a section in the back of some FEMA handbook that's, like, preparation for alien invasion. So there's definitely something with the government. They got something planned on that scenario.
They got that in, they got that in fireman manuals too. You know, if you come up on a crashed UFO, you know, there may be radiation. I mean, they got a plan for this stuff, dude. You know what I mean? You know, they got to at least talk about it.
Yeah. And of course, the big question is, if it actually happens, will it be real or will it be? You know, you wouldn't need much of a few staged events to frighten and build 5 or 10 really highly advanced aircraft, fly them over 5 or 10 big cities, have them hover there for a few hours, and then have somebody say, we don't know what they are, it's nothing to do with us, you know, put the country in lockdown or whatever. And they're actually piloted not by little green men, but by big and burly guys in flight suits, do you know what I mean? So,
yeah. Well, it would work.
What about Lord Hill Norton? I'm reading on the back of this round trip to hell in a flying saucer. He pretty much made a weird satanic statement about UFOs that kind of aligns with the final event scenario too.
Yeah, he was someone who, you know, started off more of an extraterrestrial viewpoint, and then towards the end of his life did come around more to the idea like a spiritual type phenomenon. And you do find that has happened a lot. You know, and again, I think it depends partly on your beliefs. As I said, I'd come around to that viewpoint, but not from a specific rigid belief system, more just at the idea that I don't think the extraterrestrial angle is necessarily the one that provides the most viable answer, but I don't know what does, you know. But I think, I mean, it could be, you know, aliens are so alien that's why they are so weird, you know. It's hard to know other than that something's going on. But I think Hill Norton had belief systems, and maybe over time he realized that there were certain things that he couldn't incorporate into just like a rigid nuts and bolts X-Files scenario, and so he sort of began delving into other areas then.
Well, it seems like my view on it is I do believe there are alien beings, or whatever you want to call them, that are here to look out for humanity's best interest. Like, for instance, I've told this story. There was a time when I was having terrible trouble getting interviews, and I said a prayer, and the next thing you know, I have this wild UFO sighting, multiple UFOs, my brother and nephew, just crazy, you know, in the Florida sky that's just immaculate. And then the next thing you know, I'm getting interviews with Nick Pope, Stanton Friedman. I'm on the phone with Stanton Friedman. It was like it was connected. Like somehow with that sighting, it inspired me to get these interviews. It was like, I think there is a collective of beings who are positive, who have humanity's best interest at heart. But I also think that there's something to this. You know, like I think David Icke or whatever, how the hell you say his name, he said something about aliens being cast down here like prisoners, and this is a prison for them. But maybe there's a faction, too, of asshole aliens, you know?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And, yeah, I mean, when you talk about, you know, saying something, then you suddenly get all these calls or whatever and leads and people wanting to be on the show. I think one of the things I've found a lot is that the more you delve into not just UFOs, but 4T and stuff and weird stuff in general, you begin to experience like a lot of strange synchronicities and things like that. You know, I've had that happen many times to where, you know, you really do think you are almost like in a Matrix world, you know. Reality isn't what we think it is, you know. It's like you put a thought out or whatever, and then something happens. Almost like your life is sort of, I won't say controlled or destiny, but it's almost like that you can alter reality in some respects if you know how, if you see what I mean.
You know something, Nick? When I was 8 years old, I was part of something that was pretty epic, and it physically and mentally, I know physically it changed me, but it changed me to a point to where, I immediately became sexually active. I could already, I could just see through people's BS, and I could just, I don't know, it just made me highly intuitive about people and different things, and I was, I was just very open. It was just like it was it just opened me up. It's just like it lifted the lid off the box, and so I've spent my entire life, because of that and a few other things, just having to get through life because I know all this other stuff is just, it's not important. The credit cards and the, all the everyday capitalistic stuff that Americans worry about. And it just really doesn't interest me or anything, because what happened before was just so epic that it makes all this other stuff just like it's nothing. Like it's really hard to explain. It's really hard to explain that to people because, they're like, I don't understand how that could change you. And like you were just saying, it just once you're open to the esoteric and the, your mind and your spirit and everything else is open to that, those things see you.
Yeah.
In a sense,
I agree. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's 100% right on that. I think a lot of people, through no fault of their own, you kind of, they're in the mode of, and again, I don't want to criticize people because I'm not, but a lot of people, unfortunately, are in the mode of, you get up in the morning, you go to work, you come home, cook dinner, you go to bed, you watch American Idol, and that's your life, for 50 years, working, going to bed, working, go to bed, etc., and then you die. But I think when you're not kind of stuck in that mode and you begin to realize there's more going on, you start to think about things. I think you're right. It's almost like there's a phenomenon out there, or phenomena, that think, hang on, that person's broke out of the mold. Let's see what they're doing. In simple terms, it's like that. And I think what you ask for sometimes may be what gets drawn in. And, there could be entities out there that, in simple terms, are good or can be negative or positive. And it's like, maybe one of the reasons why we have these legends and stories develop about good and evil, battle between good and evil. There are things out there that kind of recognize when certain people start, living a life that isn't just, going along with the grain, so to speak.
Yeah, and it hasn't been easy because I've had to basically go my whole life without any sort of belief system. Yeah. And because I always go back to that, and I'll be just like, now wait a minute, you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's I personally believe that that's what led to a lot of my depression issues and stuff like that. And back in, the turn of the century, I was just spiritually dead. You go through these things to where it's just like, I can't put things in a box and I can't label things and I can't do this because of this, which is what I want to do, It's normal for me to want to do that. And so I just basically come this full circle. And then, this show is like my therapy because I get to talk about it each week,
No,
and that's how I'm getting by.
Mm-hmm.
Digging,
it's like a free seminar every week. That's why I love it. Hey, I love it. It's what I live for. It's what I breathe for. It sounds like you had an experience and it awakened you. I mean, that's what it sounds like a shamanistic death.
Dude, it was all of a sudden I could not relate to any of my friends. I could not relate to playing with toys. I could not relate to, you know, just all the things that kids did. I'm thinking about what was that, you know, what was that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, was that God? Was that a God? What was that, you know? And that's what I dealt with. I mean, I didn't, all of a sudden I was on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's like mine. I was healed from cancer. My father died. I got a divorce. I went apeshit crazy, got into the occult, did a lot of drugs, started attracting bizarre things, like friggin' beings of light, Sabine-type people. Started having mass UFO sightings with multiple witnesses and family who were there. It's an awakening, and maybe that stuff happened to us because maybe it, you know, some force knew it would lead to us doing a show about these topics and subjects to, you know, maybe it's all connected on some level, you know.
Mm-hmm. So I think you're right. I think a lot of people do find that when they're in the subject, it's like they feel they're in the right place at the right time to meet certain people, as if there's some sort of grander, bigger design going on, if you like.
Definitely.
Yeah, you know, I'm a very, very dark person, but not like evil dark. You know, it's more of a, it's hard to explain. It's like a tonnage, I guess, is the only way that I could explain it. And it's just the way I think, you know. It's just the way I've seen the world my whole life. And, you know, a lot of people think I'm a Satanist and I'm evil, you know, and I'm none of those things because, you know, I don't, that would make me want to worship something. And the only thing, you know, I don't worship anything. I don't bow down to nothing and, you know, nothing like that. So, I don't know, dude.
Yourself?
I do. I am God here. Hey. That's my philosophy. I am God. I got an altar to myself.
That's what a Satanist is.
No, it is not. Well, yeah, kind of. Satan, Church of Satan worships. They don't worship Satan. They worship their nature, human nature.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that they don't actually believe in all that sort of the whole literal Satan angle. You know, it's more like a belief system of doing your own thing, etc.
Well, it's like me as far as Capricorn. That's like the darkest sign of the zodiac. That's like where Christians stole the whole, you know, devil image from, just about Pan and, you know, the cloven hoofs and, you know, horns. Pan is my astrological, you know, dude. He's like the devil. And anybody, you know, who's in entertainment that's a Capricorn, there's a lot of weird people that are Capricorns. There's a strange, like Marilyn Manson, Rob Zombie, Howard Stern. I have a dark thing too, but I think that the point is, when we have a dark side to ourselves, is you have to use creativity to channel it, like through art, through writing, through radio, through, you know, music, like you do music, instead of like doing stupid crap like killing people and, you know, beating people up and you know, taking the ignorant road. It's like we take it and transform it into art, so we don't like end up in prison getting butt raped by Bubba.
Yeah, and a lot of these, it's pretty funny. A lot of these Satanists and stuff like that, they kill chickens and cats and whatever, and
puppies.
You know, yeah.
Well, a lot of it is just
they don't want that.
A lot of this really is just people. You know, they think it's cool to sort of, let's get the Ouija board out and, you know, put some white makeup on and stuff like that.
I'm so goth.
There's a lot of difference between genuine occultism and sort of ritual magic and what people perceive it to be. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I've got like a skull ring and a black T-shirt and, you know, a Charles Manson T-shirt or whatever. I'm going to crank up a bit of Nine Inch Nails or Rob Zombie or whatever, and, you know, that I'm going to invoke whatever. No, it's like, you know, that's just like the very simple approach. There's a lot of sort of mistaken views on what genuine occultism is. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean you're conjuring up demons. It means you recognize like the existence of other realms, and you either trying to contact them or interact with them in some fashion. But they are, you don't need sort of the typical imagery, the iconography that goes along with what we think, devil worship is today, if you like. People think like Ozzy Osbourne's, the devil worship. But Ozzy's about as much a devil, my grandmother was or whatever, It's just, it's imagery, it doesn't reflect what's really going on in that domain of research, if you like.
Yeah, I just heard him. They just put out a new song. I'm like, damn, he's still putting out cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded pretty good. It surprised me. Mm-hmm. He's like 80 now or something.
Yeah, I think he's about 62 or 3, something like that.
He's a trip. But yeah, it was a good song. Well, that's like a lot of it is show. I mean, Marilyn Manson, I was big into that. I went to Antichrist Superstar Tour, and I was all into that stuff. And that it's a whole just a show. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, I mean, some people get up in arms about it, and but at the end of the day, it's like imagery. It's kind of like Alice Cooper, slicing a head off a dummy or whatever, or back in the 70s, and then. Like the 90s and Marilyn Manson, and then you see like the death metal bands and something like that. Yes, some of them believe all that, but others, it's just, it's kind of like Gene Simmons dressing, fire breathing and sticking his tongue out on stage. At the end of the day, just a man sticking his tongue out on stage wearing makeup. That's a big difference between somebody who's actually, believes, they're a demon or whatever. So.
It's shock rock, baby.
No, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you understand what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All these idiots who start complaining and ranting and shouting and demonstrating outside somebody's, they think they're going to corrupt the youth or whatever. Well, that's what rock and roll's about. It's supposed to corrupt the youth. So.
That's how it was when I went to Manson's concert in '99, Antichrist Superstar. He basically reenacted the coming of the third Antichrist on stage and had a podium set up, and there was all these Christians outside just like boycotting it, going crazy. It was great. It was really cool.
Forget that, what makes rock and roll sell is controversy. Nobody wants to be listening to music where your mum and dad are kind of clicking the fingers along with you. Do you know what I mean? It's supposed to alienate people and outrage people because that's what rock and roll's supposed to be, And I don't want to listen to some sort of oh baby, baby, baby type song. Do you know what I mean? It's like what's the point? You want to listen
Who's
to
some of your good bands, Nick? That you listen to?
What are some of the bands I listen to?
Yeah.
I like punk. I like stuff like Rob Zombie, like the sort of hard, heavy, sort of driving, not sort of heavy metal like Iron Maiden.
Slayer.
Yeah, I like Slayer. I like Megadeth. Bands like
Megadeth. I love Tool. I hope they put out a new album soon.
And I like a lot of. I mainly listen to punk music, but I like a lot of goth stuff as well. Things like Gary Newman, 9 Inch Nails.
I love Gary Newman, dude. I just got his last album, Jagged, a couple of days ago.
Oh, yeah. That's a good album. I mean, he's still, he's sort of reinventing himself, and, he still sounds good. He don't sound like somebody just going through the motions, which is, nothing worse than when you see your favourite band and they're almost like looking at the watches thinking, how much more have we got to do? Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah, it's really hard to find any new bands that don't sound like all this other crap that's out there. That's just like, there was some band I heard recently, Rise Against, and they did some song, Help Is On The Way. That sounded pretty good, but it's really hard to find new. I like Maynard a lot. He has that band Pussifer, which is a combination of Pussy and Pacifier, and he did a song with Mila Jovovich. That was The Mission. I love Maynard and Tool and Perfect Circle. That guy has 3 bands. He's on some serious drugs.
I like Tool's videos. They always used to do good videos.
Yeah, they're weird, man. I hope they put something out soon. Yeah. Anima is one of my favorites, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like being music. A lot of music today is just watered down. The bands are just created by the marketing companies. I was like, cut your hair like this, jump up and down in the video at the right time. Do you know what I mean? And it's not spontaneous, a lot of it anymore. And I think that's,
Yeah, they're like all
again,
it's
like punk. It's like manufactured punk today. It's not real outrage. It's like, oh guys, remember to swear in the interview or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
it's stupid. Really.
It's going down the toilet. There's nothing, there's nothing new. If you want to listen to anything good, stick with the oldies.
Well, I think there's nothing new in the sense that there's only a certain number of chords a guitarist can play, but there's always, I think, an ability to bring something new, and add your own twist to things. It's just that so many today, they just sort of sell their souls. Maybe even.
It seems like I'm always attracted to bands that they die, like Kurt Cobain, Jim Morrison, Peter Steele. I just found out about that like a year ago. That upset me. Typo Negative, Peter Steele, dead. It's like any band where they died from an OD or some crazy. Alice in Chains, Lane Staley, dead. All bands I love. It seems like all the lead singers just die.
I didn't know the guy out Typo Negative died.
Yeah, he died. He died like last year. It was a surprise to me too. It was on Rolling Stones. I was like, Peter Steele died? That sucks.
What was it, like drugs, was it, or something?
Yeah, he had a heart attack in the middle of the night.
Wow.
Yeah,
wild.
Heart attack.
Huh. Yeah.
That dude sounded like Dracula reincarnated. I love that shit. But yeah, he's dead, man. He has that song, Everything Dies. Like all his songs were about dying.
He's probably worried about it all the time or something.
Yeah, and finally he just croaked. Yeah, that dude was in. I remember working at some crappy job, and he was in Penthouse, and some girl showed it to me. That dude had like a schlong bigger than a baby's arm. It frightened me. I ran.
That's for Penthouse, Did you know I write for Penthouse?
Yeah, I think he was in. It was one of those magazines.
No, I said, did you know I write for Penthouse?
Did you really? Do you?
Yeah, I do quite a bit of writing for Penthouse, yeah. And all sorts.
Nice, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I just wrapped up an article for them all about people who want to join the Mile High Club. So.
Cool. I haven't looked at Penthouse in a long time. I didn't know you wrote for them. That's cool, though. That's Larry Flynn, ain't it?
Yeah, I do quite
a bit of people think
I just do UFO stuff. I do quite a bit of writing on other things. So.
Awesome. I know I just read Stephen King has a new book coming out in November. I was talking to Adam Go Rightly and some people, but basically the premise is a time traveler goes back in time and stops the JFK assassination.
No, I'm not being interested.
Yeah, definitely. So we're ending the hour. So what are some books you're working on? There's a Men in Black book, but what else you got in that dark head of yours?
Well, the Men in Black book comes out in June. That's like a full-length study of the phenomenon with various new cases and theories to discuss, as to what they might be. But I've also got an anthology-type book coming out in about a month or so from a publisher in England. It's basically a collection of articles I've written since the 80s to the present day. It's hard to find stuff in old out-of-print magazines. They're doing kind of like an anthology of stuff, that I've just written over the years. And then I'm doing a zoology book all about British weird creatures in Britain, which will probably be out some point next year. So.
Very cool. And, are we at the end, Guy?
Yeah, we are. All I hear is 50 echoes of everybody, so...
Okay.
So I'm just
well, Nick,
it's
been a pleasure. Finally got you on, and everybody go out and get Final Events. It's one of his great books of many. Buy it. It's a trip and a half. Check it out, Final Events, and definitely want to get you back on for the Men in Black sometime, and I'll talk to you about that later. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and we appreciate you doing the show, Nick. Take care.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. See you later.
Later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take a trip with me.